The moment I disembarked from the aircraft in Guangzhou, I sensed trouble brewing. My grandfather's chauffeur, Mr. Lee, should have been there waiting. He'd maintained a perfect record of airport tick-ups for 2 decades. But today he was nowhere to be found. A different vehicle sat by the sidewalk instead, a black Audi with darkened glass, the same make my father preferred. A stern-looking young man in formal attire approached me. "Your parents arranged for me to collect you," he stated. In Mandarin. I hadn't informed them of my arrival. My heart rate increased, but I maintained a calm exterior, going along with the charade. "How considerate of them," I replied. The journey passed in silence, though anxiety twisted in my stomach like a coiled spring. Guangzhou's towering buildings swept by, neon lights dancing across the wet pavement. I clutched my phone, considering contacting my attorney, but instinct told me to hold off. When we arrived at my family's ancestral home, a 3-level mansion in the old district, I anticipated comfort and fond memories. Instead, it felt like walking into a trap. My mother occupied the dining room table, sorting through documents as if this were routine business. My father stood near the window, rotating a tumbler of whiskey. Neither seemed surprised by my presence. "We need to have a discussion," I announced, bypassing any polite exchanges. My mother released a breath, placing her pen aside. "We anticipated your eventual arrival," she responded. I looked around the room. Where is grandfather's manufacturing plant? Why has it been closed? My father took a sip of his drink. "Because we no longer possess it," he replied. His statement felt like a physical blow. I stared at them, expecting some clarification or jest, but none came. "You disposed of it?" I asked, my tone becoming more pointed. My mother remained expressionless. "Indeed, several months ago. You were occupied in New York, so we managed the situation." Managed it as if they'd discarded worn-out footwear. I drew a measured breath, attempting to remain composed. "It wasn't your property to dispose of?" "Technically it was," my father replied smoothly. "You inherited it, but we oversaw the operations. It was failing, so we acted in everyone's best interest." I let out a bitter laugh. Best interest for whom? No response came. I reached into my jacket, retrieving my grandfather's testament, the authentic document, notarized and authenticated. I'd studied it countless times. My name appeared on every asset, every part of the enterprise. There was no provision permitting them to act as my representatives. I placed the document on the table. "This states something different." My mother barely acknowledged it. "You should consult with our attorney." There it was, the evasion, the corporate manipulation. I leaned closer, speaking quietly. "Fine. I'll speak with your lawyer. But understand something, if your actions were unlawful, you'll both forfeit far more than just the factory." My father's expression grew dark, but he remained silent. I spun around, grabbed my jacket, and exited. The black Audi remained outside, but I had no intention of accepting another ride. I had my own agenda, and my attorney had discovered something they hadn't anticipated. I chose not to visit their lawyer immediately. That would have meant playing by their rules, and I refused to enter a predetermined defeat. Instead, I sought out Mr. Lay. He was more than my grandfather's driver. He was the nearest thing to a trusted advisor my grandfather possessed. If anyone understood what truly transpired with the factory, it was him. His residence was located in Guangzhou's older section, nestled in a peaceful alley decorated with traditional lanterns. When he answered the door, his eyes widened with recognition. "I anticipated your arrival," he said, stepping back to allow me entry, "though I expected you sooner." That struck me like a rebuke. "You were aware of this?" I asked. Mr. Lay sighed, motioning for me to sit. His home was compact but immaculate, with framed photographs of my grandfather adorning the walls. I sensed trouble the day they announced the sale. Your parents dismissed half the workforce before the paperwork was finalized. No compensation, no justification. My jaw tightened. They portrayed the business as unsuccessful, he continued. That's what they told the employees, but it was false. My chest constricted. How can you be certain? Mr. Lay gave me a penetrating look before standing and crossing to a cabinet. He withdrew an aged metal strongbox and placed it between us. The key was already inserted. He turned it. Inside lay a collection of documents. I preserved what I could, he said, handing me a folder. Financial statements, purchase orders, the factory was generating profit even its final months. I examined the pages, my stomach dropping with each figure. The factory hadn't been dying, it had been flourishing. They intended to sell before. You could assume control, Mr. Lay said softly. I ground my teeth. My parents hadn't merely sold my inheritance, they had deceived me about their motives. Who purchased it? I inquired. Mr. Lay hesitated. That's where matters become complex. I looked up. What do you mean? He handed me another document, different from the others. A contract, not for the sale, but for a partnership. I scanned the names until I found it. My father hadn't just sold the business, he had sold it to someone he owed money to. A name I recognized immediately. A name I never expected. A name that chilled my blood. I stood, gripping the paper. I need to see this, attorney, I said. But now it wasn't simply about reclaiming my factory. It was about discovering what my father had entangled himself in. Sleep eluded me that night. My mind raced, assembling the betrayal like fragments of a broken mirror. My parents hadn't just stolen from me. They had used my grandfather's life's work to settle a debt. The name on that contract, Zhang Wei, a businessman on paper, a predator. In reality, he didn't acquire companies. He consumed them, then stripped them for valuable parts before rebranding the remains under his expanding empire. He didn't just want my grandfather's factory, he wanted his legacy, and my father had delivered it to him. By morning, I sat opposite my parents' attorney in a glass-walled office in central Guangzhou. His name was Mr. Sun, and he possessed the oily confidence of someone who believed victory was assured. He clasped his hands on the table, smiling. Your parents mentioned you had objections. I dropped the contract onto his desk. This is my objection. His smile remained unchanged. Ah, yes, the sale agreement. You mean the unlawful sale agreement? His eyebrow flickered. The sale was entirely legitimate. I leaned forward. Then why does my grandfather's will state? They couldn't sell it? I expected him to stumble, to show uncertainty, but instead he sighed like someone dealing with a naive child. There was a clause in your grandfather's will, he admitted, but your parents acted under an emergency directive. The company was at risk. They had the legal authority to... No, they didn't. I produced the will copy my lawyer had sent the previous evening. Mr. Sun barely glanced at it. A will is open to interpretation. I clenched my fists beneath the table. This was their strategy, drag me into legal quicksand until I either surrendered or gave up. Then he did something that made my blood boil. He smiled. Look, I understand your frustration, but your parents did what was necessary. I forced myself to breathe. Where is Zheng Wei? That caught him off guard. Excuse me? I tapped the contract. This sale wasn't just business. My father owed Zheng money, didn't he? Silence. I had him. I want a meeting, I said. Mr. Sun scoffed. You believe Zheng Wei will meet with you? I stood up. He will when he discovers my parents sold him something they didn't legally possess. That erased the smirk from his face. Do you understand who you're dealing with? He asked, his voice dropping. Yes, I said. Do they? I exited before he could respond. I wasn't just going to fight this. I was going to destroy the entire scheme. I didn't wait for Mr. Sun to arrange a meeting. That would have given him time to manipulate the narrative, to warn my parents, to strengthen their position. No, I went directly to Chang Wei's headquarters myself. His office occupied a sleek skyscraper overlooking the Pearl River, the type of place where power wasn't displayed but assumed. The receptionist barely acknowledged me before saying, "Do you have an appointment?" "No," I replied, "but inform him it's regarding the Guangzhou factory he recently acquired." That captured her attention. Her fingers paused over the keyboard. "He's unavailable," she said carefully. I smiled. "I'll wait." She began to protest, but then something shifted behind me. The atmosphere changed. Footsteps, controlled, deliberate. I turned. Jiang Wei himself stood in the executive lounge doorway, observing me like I was an oddity. He appeared younger than expected, perhaps late 40s, in a dark suit that likely cost more than my entire education. "You have 5 minutes," he said. I followed him into his office, a vast space with floor-to-ceiling windows. The view screamed dominance. He gestured to a chair, but I remained standing. "I'm here about the sale of my grandfather's factory," I said. He sat down, adjusting his cufflinks. "Your parents' factory," he corrected. I placed the will on his desk. "Mine," I said. He glanced at it, then at me, unimpressed. "You traveled all this way to show me a document?" "I came to inform you that the sale was fraudulent." That got his attention. His fingers drummed against the desk. "That's a serious allegation." "It's not an allegation, it's a fact," I said, leaning forward. "My parents had no legal authority to sell it, which means you don't own it." A silence, then he laughed. A slow, calculated chuckle, as if I just told him the world's funniest joke. "You think a will is going to stop me?" he said. I didn't flinch. "I think a lawsuit will." He smirked. "Lawsuits require time, money, influence. I possess all three." "Do you?" I clenched my jaw. Then he tilted his head. "Your father didn't tell you, did he?" The hair on my neck stood up. "Tell me what?" Jiang leaned back, watching me, enjoying this. "He didn't just sell the factory to pay off a debt. He offered it to me before he was even in trouble." My stomach dropped. I shook my head. "That doesn't make sense. The factory was profitable. Why would he—" Then I saw it. The truth hit me like a freight train. My father hadn't sold the factory because he had to. He had sold it because he wanted to. Because he never intended for me to have it in the first place. Jiang saw the realization dawn on my face and smiled. "This was never about debt," he said. "It was about keeping you out." I stood there, fists clenched, pulse thundering in my ears. Jiang folded his hands. "So tell me, now that you know the truth, what are you going to do?" I didn't have an answer, not yet. But I damn well was going to find one. I left Chang Wei's office feeling like the foundation had been torn from beneath me. My father hadn't been coerced into this arrangement. He had orchestrated it deliberately, systematically. He had chosen to strip me of my inheritance, to erase my grandfather's legacy, to ensure I was left with nothing. And Jiang Wei, he was just fulfilling his role, watching from the throne my father had practically handed him. I gritted my teeth. No, not like this. I wasn't going to surrender and let them win. I needed leverage. By the time I reached Mr. Lee's apartment, my head was throbbing. I knocked twice before he opened the door, his eyes scanning my face. "You discovered something," he said. It wasn't a question. I stepped inside. Jiang told me the sale wasn't about debt. My father never wanted me to have the business. "Mr." Les' jaw tightened. "Your grandfather suspected as much." I froze. "What?" He sighed, rubbing his temples. "He never stated it directly, but he had his doubts about your father. Said he was always seeking a way out, a way to transform the business into something it was never meant to be. I sank into the nearest chair. Why didn't he say anything? He did. He left it all in the will. I shook my head. The will wasn't enough. They sold it anyway. Mr. Lay nodded gravely. Then, after a pause, he stood and walked to an old wooden cabinet. He pulled out a small locked box. Your grandfather was careful, he said, handing it to me. I looked at the box. It was heavy, solid. I ran my fingers over the top and noticed something. His initials engraved in gold. What's inside? Mr. Lay handed me a key. The real insurance policy. I opened the box at a dimly lit cafe, away from prying eyes. Inside were several folders, neatly organized, each labeled in my grandfather's precise handwriting. I flipped through them, bank statements, contracts, handwritten notes. Then I found it, a second contract, one that overrode the sale my parents had made. I scanned the document, my heart racing. It was signed, stamped, legally binding. My grandfather had anticipated this betrayal, and he had ensured there was a way to undo it. I gripped the paper, adrenaline surging through me. I finally had something real, something that could tear this entire deal apart. I grabbed my phone and called my lawyer. Do you trust me? I asked. A pause, then, do you even have to ask? Good, I said, because we're about to start a war. I didn't go home that night. Home wasn't safe anymore. Instead, I checked into a small hotel near the river and spent hours poring over the documents my grandfather had left behind. My mind raced, fitting the pieces together. The real contract wasn't just a loophole. It was a landmine buried beneath everything my parents had done, because my grandfather hadn't just left me the business. He had made sure that if anyone tried to sell it without my consent, the deal would be null and void. Legally, the company still belonged to me. I could undo everything. I just had to be willing to go all the way. The next morning, I walked into my parents' house like a man ready to burn the whole place down. My mother was in the sitting room, scrolling through her phone like she didn't have a care in the world. My father was by the window, drinking his usual morning coffee. They barely looked up when I entered. I know what you did, I said, throwing the contract onto the coffee table. My father glanced at it, unimpressed. Oh, another piece of paper. I stepped closer. It's the piece of paper, the one that overrides the sale. That got his attention. His fingers tightened around the coffee cup. My mother finally looked up. Where did you get this? I smiled coldly. From the one person you idiots forgot about, Grandpa himself. My father's face darkened. You have no idea what you're getting yourself into. No, I shot back. You don't. I leaned in, lowering my voice. I spoke to Jiang Wei. That made my mother sit up straighter. I nodded. Yeah, and you know what? He doesn't like being played. My father's jaw clenched. This is between us. You had no right to. You had no right to sell what wasn't yours. I snapped. And now Jiang's going to find out that the deal he made with you is about to collapse. A silence. I could see it in my father's eyes, the calculation, the fear. For the first time in my life, he was the one scrambling for control. You have no idea what kind of man Jiang Wei is, my mother said quietly. I laughed. Oh, I know exactly what kind of man he is. That's why he's about to turn on you the second he realizes you dragged him into an illegal deal. I watched the panic settle in. My father stood, pacing now. My mother's fingers twitched. This was it. This was the moment the tide turned. Then my father stopped pacing. He turned to me, something dangerous in his expression. You think you've won, he said softly. I stared him down. No, but I think you've lost. Then my phone buzzed. I pulled it out, a message from my lawyer. Jiang wants to meet tonight, alone. My heartbeat quickened. I looked back at my father, and for the first time, I saw real fear in his eyes. The air in Jiang Wei's private lounge was thick with cigar smoke and unspoken threats. The place wasn't a restaurant, not really. It was where deals happened, where power shifted hands. A handful of men in suits sat at nearby tables, pretending not to listen. Jiang sat across from me, relaxed, sipping tea like this was just another business meeting. But I could see it in his eyes. He was deciding whether to shake my hand or bury me. "You're brave," he said finally, walking in here alone. I met his gaze. "You wanted to meet, so let's talk." He smirked. "All right, let's talk about how your father lied to me." I exhaled, keeping my voice steady. "He didn't just lie. He sold you something he didn't own. You know what that means?" Chang studied me for a long moment. Then he placed his cup down. Carefully. "It means I have a problem," he said, "and I don't like problems." I nodded. "So let's fix it." His expression didn't change, but I could feel the shift, the test. "You're asking me to walk away from a deal worth millions?" he said. "No," I said, leaning in. "I'm asking you to back the right deal." Jang raised an eyebrow. I pulled out my grandfather's real contract and placed it on the table. "This wipes out my father's deal. Legally, the factory is still mine, but I don't just want to take it back." I let the words hang for a second before delivering the hook. "I want a partner." A silence, then the smallest flicker of interest in Jang's eyes. "You want me as a partner?" I nodded. My grandfather built something great, but I know it needs to evolve. I don't just want to run it, I want to expand. And you're the kind of man who knows how to make that happen. I could see it now, the calculation, the weighing of risks and rewards. Jiang Wei didn't care about my family drama. He cared about power, opportunity. And I'd just given him one. Finally, he smiled. "You're smarter than your father," he said. I smirked. That's not exactly a high bar. Jiang chuckled, then leaned back. "All right, let's say I'm interested. What happens to your father?" I met his gaze head on. "That's up to you." Jiang studied me, then slowly nodded. "I like you," he said. "You know how to play the game?" He extended his hand. I shook it. And just like that, my parents were finished up by the time I left Jiang. Wei's lounge, the city felt different, sharper, like the air itself had shifted in my favor. I had just done what my father never could. I had made a deal with Jiang on my terms. And now my parents were about to feel what it was like to lose everything. I didn't give them a warning. I wanted them to feel it. When I walked back into their house the next morning, my father was already on the phone, pacing frantically. My mother sat stiffly on the couch, eyes locked on the contract I had left the night before. They knew. I took my time pouring a cup of tea, savoring the silence before. I dropped the bomb. I spoke to Jiang. My father stopped pacing. My mother finally looked up. "He's not happy," I continued. "Turns out people don't like being dragged into illegal deals." My father's face was pale now. "What did you do?" I smiled. "What you should have done. I made an offer." He shook his head, almost laughing. "You have no idea what you've just stepped into." "No," I shot back. "You don't?" I leaned in. "Jiang and I have a deal now. He's backing me. The factory, it's mine again." A silence. Then my father's voice dropped. "You don't understand how business works." "Oh, I understand perfectly," I said. "I understand that you sold out your own father's legacy because you were afraid of being overshadowed." His jaw clenched, but he didn't deny it. I turned to my mother. "And you let him. You both did." Her lips pressed together, but she didn't look away. I exhaled, letting the weight of it settle. "It's over." "You lost," my father scoffed, trying to regain control. "You think Jiang Wei is your friend? He'll chew you up and spit you out." I smirked. "Maybe, but at least I'm sitting at the table." He had nothing left to say. I finished my tea, set the cup down, and turned to leave. But before I walked out, I glanced back. Oh, and one more thing, I added. Jung's sending someone over later. You might want to be home for that. My father's face went slack. My mother inhaled sharply. I didn't wait to see the fallout. I had a factory to run.